I have to comment on this because it's perfectly insane. It's perfectly insane. And it demonstrates that our political class should never be given any sort of power at all. It's absurd. Absurd. Okay, so remember that time when COVID-19 was a thing? Remember? That was kind of a thing, right? I mean, we were locked in our houses from like the middle of March all the way till now. And we were told that if you go out in public and you breathe anywhere close to anybody without a mask, you're evil and you're killing grandma. And if you talk about reopening businesses, if you even talk about it, you're killing grandma. You're engaging in an experiment in human sacrifice. Weird how that all went away over the last week. Isn't that weird? You have Eric Garcetti, video of Mayor Eric Garcetti, who had locked down all of LA County for months on end, all of it. Restaurants shut down, nail salons shut down, businesses shut down, schools shut down. Yesterday, you had our moron mayor, Eric Garcetti, out in the middle of a crowd in his neighborhood with no mask and people 1 foot around him. By the way, what do you think people do at rallies? Do you think that they whisper to one another 6 feet apart? Or do you think they shout as loudly as possible, expelling germs from their mouth at every shout? The entire rationale for, by the way, shutting down churches is that when people sing very loudly, they expel spittle, and that gets in other people's orifices, and that this conveys COVID-19. What do you think protests with tens of thousands of people do? What do you think that does? So you had Eric Garcetti doing that. You had Bill de Blasio out in public. You had Phil Murphy out in public. You had every lockdown advocate in America who's a Democrat out in public in the middle of large crowds, no masking, hugging people. Weird. It's almost as though I kind of think that your perspective on COVID-19 was now bullcrap, that you are full of it, that you actually don't think it's that dangerous. By the way, you know who else is picking up on that signal? Everyone in Los Angeles. I was on the freeway in LA yesterday. 85% of normal traffic. I'm not kidding. Over here on like the 405, 85% of normal traffic. Like full on traffic down Ventura Boulevard. Because you know what? People pick up on the signal. You're not taking it seriously when you're obviously not taking it seriously. NPR printed a piece yesterday called Protesting Racism versus Risking COVID-19. I wouldn't weigh these crises separately. So apparently, and then they quote a supposed experts in the issue as saying that protesting racial inequality is very important because racial inequality kills people. But COVID-19 also kills people. But if you protest racism, you're also stopping COVID-19. Amazing. So basically, if I go out in a giant crowd and I pray, COVID-19 is going to get me. If I go out there and I read Torah this weekend with my family at a shul, COVID-19 is the most evil virus I've ever heard of. COVID-19 hates Jews. But here's the good news. COVID-19 loves anti-racism. Loves it. COVID-19 will just stop existing as soon as you're protesting racism. So if you go out there, and in some ways it's very anti-Jewish, it seems, like COVID-19, very anti-Christian, very anti-Jewish. But in other ways, COVID-19 is really super virtuous. And the way that you know COVID-19 is really virtuous is that if you were at a lockdown protest, COVID-19 was not only going to kill you, it was going to kill your grandmother you're not associating with. But if you're at a protest that is anti-race, American racism, COVID-19 not only will not kill you, you are inoculating yourself to COVID-19. What an amazing woke virus. Why has this not been unleashed on America before? According to this NPR piece, tens of thousands of people, masked and unmasked, have thronged the streets of Minneapolis, Atlanta, Louisville, Kentucky, and other cities in the week since George Floyd died after a white Minneapolis police officer kneeled on his neck. They are the largest public gatherings in the U.S. since the pandemic forced widespread shutdowns. Many local officials warned of a possible spike in new cases in 1 or 2 weeks. Dr. Elaine Nasosi, an assistant professor of global health at Boston University, said risk of transmission is lower in open spaces, but wherever there's a gathering, there is still the risk of transmitting the virus. Health experts urged protesters not to sing and shout to reduce the threat of person-to-person transmission. The New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene issued a list of tips for demonstrators to lower their risk of contracting COVID-19. And Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser said she's worried about how consecutive days of protests could trigger an influx of COVID-19 cases. But according to dozens of public health and disease experts who signed an open letter in support of the protests, the risks of congregating during a global pandemic shouldn't keep people from protesting racism. This is according to dozens of public health and disease experts. I feel like these medical experts are like Dr. Nick on The Simpsons. Right? These are not medical experts. Okay, they know about as much about medicine as my 6-year-old daughter when she puts on her white coat to dress like mommy. They wrote a letter saying white supremacy is a lethal public health issue that predates and contributes to COVID-19. So I'm just going to point out here. We shut down the most thriving economy in the history of the world. We put 40 million people out of work. This has, we know, severe health consequences. We know that if you put tens of millions of people out of work, you're going to get an uptick in suicide. You're going to get an uptick in domestic abuse. You're going to get a massive uptick in drug dependency. You're going to get a massive uptick in mental illness. You're going to get a massive uptick in people who are not going in for their vaccinations and their surgeries. We know all this because all of this happens to be factual. But if you protested, if you said, hold on, there's some health costs to this COVID-19 shutdown, you are killing grandma. But if you're out there and you're just shouting that America's bad and police forces are racist, no solutions, nothing that actually alleviates the problem, if you just go out there and you yell a lot about George Floyd, COVID-19 is solved, guys. COVID-19, it's over. But these health experts saying that you can now go protest because we agree with the protest is insane. So this doctor and associate, she said, data is showing that blacks and Latinos have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. Racism is one of the reasons this disparity exists. She said, racism is a social determinant of health. It affects the physical and mental health of blacks in the United States. I wouldn't weigh these crises separately. Okay, so put aside the notion that racism is killing people of COVID-19, which of course is a bizarre notion. Are people being wheeled into the hospital and doctors are like, not taking care of him, he's black, get him out of here. Toss him in that freezer out back. We're done. Not seeing a lot of evidence of that. But let's just take it at face value. She says, I wouldn't weigh these crises separately. Okay, so why should we weigh the government-imposed economic lockdown that has destroyed tens of millions of lives separately from the lockdown itself, from COVID-19? It's amazing. It's amazing. By the way, it's the politicians too. So here's what Governor Phil Murphy said, this idiot governor of New Jersey. He was asked about the fact that the protests violated his ban on large gatherings. And here's what he said, quote, it's one thing to protest what day nail salons are opening. It's another to come out and peacefully protest about somebody who was murdered right before our eyes. You know what COVID-19 doesn't give two craps about, like at all? What your cause is, because it's a disease. So that was your entire argument. Your entire argument was, I can shut down churches and synagogues and leave certain businesses open because certain ones are essential and certain ones are not. Now he's just making clear he doesn't like churches and synagogues, and he likes these protests, so he's going to allow the protests to go on, but he's going to continue to shut down churches and synagogues. If that same exact crowd went out and protested the lockdown, very bad, shut them down, they're creating COVID, right? This is what Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, said. Well, if you're out protesting, you may spread COVID. We're going to have a bigger lockdown now because of that. But if you're protesting racism, police racism, in a state run by Democrats, then, well, you know, COVID-19, we've stopped COVID-19 cold, guys. I mean, this is good news. COVID-19's over. We stopped it. Victory has been achieved. Incredible. The worst on this was, of course, Bill de Blasio, the idiot mayor of New York who should be ousted as soon as humanly possible. Bill de Blasio was specifically asked by a Jewish newspaper called Hamodia yesterday about the fact that he was sending cop cars to Williamsburg to tell people not to congregate for Mariv, that's the evening service for Jews. He really was. They sent like a line of cop cars. The tape is available. He sent a line of cop cars in the middle of Midtown Manhattan being looted and tens of thousands of protesters being trapped on the Manhattan Bridge. He was sending cop cars to Williamsburg to tell the Jews, don't go to Minyan. Stop going to Minyan. You 10 Jews congregating and praying to God. Stop that right now. So de Blasio was asked about this. He was asked about this. Here was de Blasio's insane and, by the way, First Amendment violative answer.
When you see a nation, an entire nation, simultaneously grappling with an extraordinary crisis seated in 400 years of American racism, I'm sorry, that is not the same question as the understandably aggrieved store owner or the devout religious person who wants to go back to services. This is something that's not about which side of the spectrum you're on. It's about
it is.
A deep, deep American crisis we have never seen.
No, it is about exactly which side of the spectrum you're on, because you are now declaring it is a more important American activity to go out in the streets and shout about something without any practical solutions or evidence that this is broad systemic racism. That's more important than you having a business, you having a way to make a living, you putting food on the table, you praying to God, right? By the way, those last few things seem to be at the heart of what most Americans do every single day and consider their fundamental freedoms. So it's not important that you go back to work. It's not important that you earn a living. It's not important that you invest in yourself and your family. It's not important that you go to shul or that you go to church or that you go to mosque. None of that's important. What's really important is my daughter getting arrested at a protest last night. That was truly important activity. The real important activity in American life is going out and protesting against miasmatic American racism based on an incident where all Americans agree that police brutality took place. Deeply important. That's important. COVID-19 can have no truck against that. COVID-19, the most virtuous virus ever devised by man, apparently. Really well done. The wokest virus in the history of the world. Or alternatively, this is all bullcrap. Alternatively, it turns out that our political leaders were not actually being honest with us because either they were lying then or they are lying now. Either they are lying about the deadliness of COVID-19 then in order to lock us down, or they are lying about the deadliness of COVID-19 now in order to let people out of jail so that they can go and protest. Well done, everybody. Well done, everybody. Problem of COVID-19 solved. I'm glad that this whole situation could end with at least one positive, which is that people can apparently now go out and, I don't know if we can go back to work though. But if your work involves you going out in the street and lying down on a bridge, then I guess you're good to go. So solid stuff there. Democratic governors and mayors. Just really, really well done.